never thought my world would shatter like this. The white envelope trembled in my hands, and I could feel my fingers losing their grip on reality. Caden's name was printed on the invitation card in elegant gold letters, and seeing it made my chest constrict so tightly I thought I might collapse right there in my tiny apartment. This wasn't just a piece of paper. This was the final nail in the coffin of everything we'd built together, everything I'd foolishly believed would last forever. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in as I stared at those words. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Caden Pierce and Evelyn Hartford. My breath came in short, painful gasps. I wanted to rip the card into pieces, burn it, pretend I'd never received it, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, feeling every ounce of hope drain from my body like water through a shattered glass. 2 months ago, everything changed. We'd been lying in bed together, his arm wrapped around my waist, when he suddenly pulled away. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He sat up, wouldn't look at me, and I knew something terrible was coming. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless, like he'd rehearsed the words 1,000 times. I can't do this anymore, Martin. I need someone stable. Stable. That word echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. What did stable even mean? We had stability. We had love. We had 3 years of memories, of late-night conversations, of planning a future together. But apparently none of that mattered. I wanted to scream at him, to demand an explanation that made sense, but all I could manage was a pathetic whisper asking why. He finally looked at me then, and his eyes were cold, distant, like he was looking at a stranger. My family expects certain things from me. They need me to marry someone who fits into their world, someone they can understand, someone they can understand. Translation: not an Omega, not me. His family had always been old money, traditional, stuck in their outdated beliefs about how society should function. I knew they'd never fully accepted me, but I thought Caden was stronger than their prejudices. I thought what we had was worth fighting for. I was wrong. He left that night, took his things, and walked out of my life like I meant nothing. I spent the next few weeks in a haze, going through the motions of daily life while feeling completely hollow inside. My friends tried to help, tried to get me to talk about it, but how could I explain the depth of that betrayal? How could I put into words the agony of being discarded like I was nothing more than an inconvenient phase in his life? Then, 3 weeks ago, everything got infinitely more complicated. I'd been feeling off for days, nauseous in the mornings, exhausted by noon, emotional over the smallest things. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, just my body reacting to the breakup. But some part of me knew better. Some part of me had already accepted the truth before I even took the test. When those 2 pink lines appeared, my entire world tilted on its axis. Pregnant. I was pregnant with Caden's child, and he had no idea. He was gone, planning a future with someone else, while I was left carrying the physical evidence of what we'd shared. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I spent hours staring at that positive test, my mind racing through 1,000 scenarios. Should I tell him? Would he even care? Would this change anything, or would it just make me look desperate, like I was trying to trap him into coming back? The thought of his pity was unbearable. The thought of him staying out of obligation rather than love was even worse. For the past 3 weeks I'd been living in this strange limbo, knowing I had to make a decision but terrified of every option. I'd scheduled a doctor's appointment, gotten confirmation, learned I was about 8 weeks along. I'd started taking prenatal vitamins, cut out caffeine, made small adjustments to prepare for this new reality. But I hadn't told anyone, not my friends, not my family, and definitely not Caden. Now holding this invitation, I felt the weight of that secret crushing me. The wedding was in 2 days. 2 days until Caden legally bound himself to someone else. Until any chance of us reconciling disappeared completely. Part of me wanted to forget about it, to throw the invitation away and move on with my life. I could raise this child alone. I had a decent job as a graphic designer, a supportive circle of friends, enough savings to get by. I didn't need him, but another part of me, the part that still loved him despite everything, needed to see him one more time, needed to look into his eyes and know for certain that what we had was really over. Maybe I was torturing myself. Maybe I was just being pathetically hopeful, but I couldn't let him marry someone else without at least witnessing it, without giving myself that closure. My hand moved to my stomach, still flat, showing no outward signs of the life growing inside. What should I do? I whispered to the baby who couldn't hear me, who couldn't answer. Do I tell him? Do I let him go? The silence in my apartment was deafening. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the city. People going about their normal lives, completely unaware that mine was falling apart. I envied them their simplicity, their uncomplicated existence. I envied them their ability to make plans without considering the impact on a tiny life they were responsible for creating. I set the invitation down on my kitchen counter and walked to the window, looking out at the streetlights beginning to flicker on as evening approached. The sky was that particular shade of gray that comes just before sunset, neither light nor dark, suspended in transition. That's how I felt, suspended. Caught between my past with Caden and an uncertain future as a single parent. Finally, I made my decision. I would go to the wedding. Not to make a scene, not to confess my pregnancy, not to beg him to come back. I would go to prove to myself that I could survive this, that I could watch him commit to someone else and still walk away with my dignity intact. I would go because I needed to see with my own eyes that he was truly happy, that his choice was the right one for him, even if it destroyed me. I didn't know then that this decision would change everything. I didn't know that fate had other plans, that secrets have a way of revealing themselves at the worst possible moments. All I knew was that I had to go, had to face this final goodbye, had to close this chapter of my life before I could begin the next one. 2 days? I had 2 days to prepare myself for the hardest thing I'd ever done. The venue was everything I'd expected and more. The kind of place that screamed wealth and privilege. With soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my annual salary, and floral arrangements so elaborate they looked like they belonged in a museum. I stood in the doorway, my heart hammering so hard I thought everyone must be able to hear it, and tried to convince myself I could actually do this. Guests milled about in their designer clothing, sipping champagne and laughing with the easy confidence of people who'd never known financial struggle. I felt completely out of place in my simple black suit, the only formal wear I owned that still fit properly. I'd lost weight over the past 2 months, stress stealing my appetite, though the pregnancy had recently started bringing it back with a vengeance. Speaking of the pregnancy, I'd been feeling increasingly unwell all morning. The nausea had been brutal, forcing me to spend 20 minutes hunched over my toilet before I could even attempt to get dressed. I'd managed to keep down some crackers and ginger tea, but my stomach still felt unsettled, queasy in a way that made me question the wisdom of coming here at all. I should leave. The thought hit me like a physical blow. This was a mistake. What was I even hoping to accomplish? I started to turn around to make my escape before anyone noticed me. When the ceremony music began, the crowd started moving toward their seats, and I found myself swept along with them, too polite or too cowardly to push against the current. I ended up near the back, partially hidden behind a tall man with broad shoulders. Perfect. I could see without being seen, could witness this moment without drawing attention to myself. My hands gripped the back of the chair in front of me as the processional started, bridesmaids gliding down the aisle in their pale pink dresses, followed by the flower girl, and then Evelyn appeared, and I understood. I understood why Caden had chosen her, why his family approved, why I'd never stood a chance. She was breathtaking in an objectively undeniable way, her wedding dress a masterpiece of lace and silk, her dark hair swept up elegantly, her smile radiant as she looked toward the altar. She belonged in this world of champagne and chandeliers. My eyes followed her gaze, and there he was. Caden stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and seeing him again after 2 months felt like being struck by lightning. He looked good, better than good. He looked happy, his face lit up with genuine joy as he watched his bride approach, and that hurt more than anything else could have. I'd hoped stupidly, pathetically, that maybe he'd been miserable without me, that maybe he'd realized his mistake, but no. He was clearly exactly where he wanted to be, marrying exactly who he wanted to marry. I was the only one still suffering, the only one who couldn't move on. The realization made me feel small and foolish. The ceremony began. the efficient's voice droning on about love and commitment and forever. I should have been listening, should have been processing this moment, but instead I found myself studying Caden's face, memorizing every detail. The way his jaw tensed slightly when he was emotional, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the exact shade of his eyes, somewhere between gray and blue depending on the light. I was so focused on him that I almost missed it when his gaze swept across the crowd. It was just a casual glance, the kind you make when you're standing in front of a large group of people. But then his eyes landed on me, and everything stopped. His expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, confusion, something that might have been guilt. For a long moment we just stared at each other, the entire room fading away until it was just us, connected across the distance by the history we shared and all the words we'd never said. Evelyn said something to him, pulling his attention back, and the moment shattered. He blinked, turned to face her, responded to whatever she'd asked. But his shoulders had tensed and I could see the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for hers. My stomach chose that moment to revolt spectacularly. The nausea I'd been fighting all morning came back with a vengeance, accompanied by a wave of dizziness that made the room tilt sideways. I gripped the chair harder, trying to breathe through it, trying to will my body to cooperate for just a little longer. But my body had other plans. The combination of stress, morning sickness, and the emotional devastation of watching Caden marry someone else proved too much. My vision started to blur around the edges, dark spots dancing across my field of view. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears too fast, too loud, drowning out the efficient's voice. I needed to sit down. I needed air. I needed to get out of here before I made a complete fool of myself. I took a step backward, intending to slip out quietly, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt like water, unable to support my weight. The last thing I clearly remember is seeing Caden's face turn toward me again, his eyes widening in alarm. Someone nearby gasped. The room spun one final time, a nauseating rotation that sent my stomach lurching. I heard someone call my name, the voice distant and distorted as if coming from underwater. Martin. Was that Caden? It sounded like him, but that didn't make sense. He was at the altar getting married, living his perfect life without me. Why would he call my name? Why would he sound so panicked? I tried to answer, tried to say I was fine, that everyone should ignore me and continue with the ceremony. But words wouldn't form. My mouth wouldn't work. My body was shutting down, overloaded by everything I'd been carrying for the past 2 months, every secret and heartbreak and impossible situation finally catching up to me. The floor rushed up to meet me. Or maybe I rushed down to meet it. Either way, the impact never came. Strong arms caught me just before I hit the ground, and I smelled his cologne, that familiar scent that I'd been trying to forget for 2 months. Caden. Somehow, impossibly, it was Caden holding me. Someone call an ambulance. His voice was frantic, scared in a way I'd never heard before. Martin, stay with me. Open your eyes. Please. I wanted to reassure him, wanted to tell him I was okay, but consciousness was slipping away like sand through my fingers. The last thing I felt before everything went dark was his hand on my face, gentle and terrified, and his voice breaking as he whispered my name over and over like a prayer. Waking up in a hospital bed is a uniquely disorienting experience. The sterile smell hit me first, that distinctive combination of antiseptic and industrial cleaning products that every medical facility seems to share. Then came the sounds, the steady beeping of monitors, the distant murmur of voices in the hallway, the soft hiss of air through the ventilation system. I kept my eyes closed for a moment longer, trying to piece together how I'd ended up here. The wedding. Caden. The dizziness. Oh God. My eyes snapped open, and the first thing I saw was the white ceiling tiles above me, one of them with a small water stain in the corner. I turned my head slowly, taking in the IV in my arm, the blood pressure cuff, the various machines monitoring my vital signs. A private room, I noticed. Someone had paid for a private room. Then I saw him. Caden sat in the chair beside my bed, still wearing his tuxedo pants and white shirt, though his jacket was draped over the back of the chair and his tie hung loose around his neck. His head was in his hands, elbows resting on his knees, and his entire body radiated tension and exhaustion. He looked like he'd been sitting there for hours. I must have made some sound, 'cause his head jerked up immediately. Our eyes met, and I watched his expression transform. Relief flooded his features, so intense it was almost painful to witness. His eyes were bloodshot, I realized. Had he been crying? Martin. My name came out rough, like he'd been screaming or crying or both. He lunged forward, grabbing my hand before I could even think to pull away. Thank God. You scared the hell out of me. My throat felt dry, my voice weak when I finally managed to speak. What happened? How long have I been here? About 4 hours. He squeezed my hand tighter and I could feel the fine tremor running through his fingers. You collapsed at the wedding. The paramedics said you were severely dehydrated and your blood pressure had dropped dangerously low. They ran some tests to make sure there wasn't anything seriously wrong. The tests. Oh no. The tests would have shown, Martin. His voice changed, became softer, more uncertain. The doctor told me, about the baby, about your pregnancy. The world seemed to stop spinning. My worst nightmare, the scenario I'd been desperately trying to avoid, had just come true. Caden knew about the baby and he'd found out in the worst possible way. On his wedding day because I'd been stupid enough to show up when I should have stayed home. I'm sorry. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I'm so sorry. I didn't come there to ruin your wedding. I wasn't going to tell you. I was just, my voice cracked and I had to stop. Had to take a breath before I could continue. I was just going to watch and then leave. I wasn't going to interfere with your life. I swear I wasn't. Stop. His voice was firm but not angry. Just stop apologizing. You didn't ruin anything. He ran his free hand through his hair, messing it up completely. Though I suppose technically the wedding is postponed now, since the groom abandoned his bride at the altar to ride in an ambulance with his ex. I stared at him, trying to process that information. You left? In the middle of the ceremony? You collapsed, Martin. You really think I was going to just let the paramedics take you and continue getting married like nothing happened? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Evelyn was not pleased. Her father was even less pleased. I imagine I'll be getting a very strongly worded call from my own father sometime in the next hour. Caden, you can't. I tried to sit up, but he gently pushed me back down. You need to go back. Fix this. Explain that it was just a medical emergency, that I'm nobody important. You can still salvage the wedding. You can still. Nobody important? He cut me off and now there was anger in his voice, though I didn't think it was directed at me. You're carrying my child, Martin. How exactly does that make you nobody important? I didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor tracking my elevated pulse. How far along, he asked finally. 8 weeks. Almost 9 now. He did the math quickly. I could see the realization dawn in his eyes. So this happened before we broke up. He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Before you left me for someone more suitable. I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Yes. He flinched like I'd slapped him. That's not what he stopped, shook his head. Actually no. You're right. That's exactly what I did. I left you because I was a coward who cared more about what my family thought than about the person I loved. Loved. Past tense. The word hit me like a physical blow. Even though I'd known it was true. He didn't love me anymore. He'd moved on, found someone better, someone his family approved of. This situation didn't change that. You don't have to do this, I said quietly. The guilt trip, the concerned act. I know you have obligations to Evelyn and your family. I'm not asking you for anything. I can handle this on my own. Handle it on your own. He repeated my words slowly, like he was tasting them, finding them lacking. You mean raise my child without me? Go through the pregnancy alone? Do all of it without any support? People do it all the time, but you shouldn't have to. His intensity surprised me. This is my responsibility too, Martin. This baby is half mine. I can't just walk away and pretend it doesn't exist. You walked away from me easily enough. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was too tired and emotionally raw to take them back. He absorbed the hit without arguments, his jaw tightening. You're right, I did, and that was the biggest mistake I've ever made. He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine, but I'm not making that mistake again. I'm not walking away from you or our child. What about Evelyn? What about your family? What about all those things that were more important than me 2 months ago? I hated how desperate I sounded, hated the hope that was starting to bloom in my chest despite my best efforts to crush it. I don't know, he admitted. I don't have all the answers, but I know I can't marry Evelyn now. Not when you're here pregnant with my baby. Not when He stopped abruptly, seeming to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. Not when you what? He shook his head. Nothing. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is making sure you're okay. Making sure the baby is okay. Everything else can wait. I wanted to argue, wanted to push him away before he could hurt me again. But I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, and some small, weak part of me wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different this time. The baby's fine, I said instead. The doctor already checked. Said everything looks normal for 9 weeks. Relief washed over his face again. Good. That's good. He squeezed my hand once more, then seemed to realize he was still holding it and slowly let go. You should rest. You've been through a lot today. So have you? I pointed out. Your wedding day didn't exactly go as planned. No, he agreed, a strange expression crossing his face. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Before I could ask what he meant, a nurse entered the room, clipboard in hand, and the moment passed. She checked my vitals, asked me a series of questions about how I was feeling, and informed me that the doctor wanted to keep me overnight for observation. Caden never left, sitting quietly in his chair while the nurse worked, his presence a constant reminder that everything had changed. After she left, I closed my eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. I felt Caden's hand cover mine again, gentle and warm, and heard him whisper something I couldn't quite make out. Sleep pulled me under before I could ask him to repeat it, dragging me down into blessed unconsciousness where I didn't have to think about weddings or pregnancies or impossible situations. When I woke again several hours later, he was still there, keeping watch like he had every right to be. And despite everything, despite all the hurt and betrayal, I felt safer than I had in months. Coming home from the hospital felt strange, like returning to a place that was simultaneously familiar and completely foreign. My apartment looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. The secret I'd been carrying alone was now shared, and somehow that made it feel more real, more terrifying, more permanent. I expected to be alone again, expected Caden to drop me off with some platitudes about staying in touch and then disappear back into his life with Evelyn. That's what made sense. That's what I'd prepared myself for during the quiet ride from the hospital. But he didn't leave. He came inside, set my overnight bag by the door, and immediately started tidying up the living room I'd left in disarray 2 days ago. You don't have to do that, I said, watching him fold the blanket I'd left crumpled on the couch. I can handle it. He glanced at me and there was something almost defensive in his expression. The doctor said you need rest. No stress, no overexertion. So I'm handling it. That was 3 days ago. He never left. Well, technically he left every night around 11, but he came back every morning at 7 with fresh bagels and fruit, like he'd appointed himself my personal caretaker. I didn't know what to do with this version of Caden, this attentive, domestic version who remembered I liked my coffee with oat milk and knew exactly how I preferred my eggs scrambled. By the 4th day, I'd stopped protesting. By the 5th day, it started feeling almost normal to hear his key in the lock, to smell whatever breakfast he'd brought, to find him sitting at my kitchen table scrolling through pregnancy articles on his phone. He'd started a list of things we'd need for the baby, color-coded and organized by trimester. It was so thoroughly Caden that it made my chest ache. On the 6th evening, I found him in my kitchen attempting to make dinner. He'd grocery shopped without asking me, filling my previously sparse refrigerator with vegetables and proteins and ingredients I couldn't identify. The sound of chopping drew me from my bedroom, where I'd been pretending to nap but actually just lying awake thinking about how complicated everything had become. What are you making? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Pasta primavera. He didn't look up from the cutting board, his knife moving with surprising competence through a yellow bell pepper. You mentioned last week that you'd been craving vegetables. Something about the baby wanting nutrients. I had mentioned that. In passing, barely a comment, but he'd remembered and acted on it, and I didn't know what to do with that information. I watched him work in silence for a moment, noticed the way his shoulders had relaxed since that first tense day at the hospital. Noticed how he moved through my kitchen like he belonged there. Caden. His name came out softer than I intended. When is it? He paused mid-chop. When is what? Your wedding. The rescheduled one. I forced myself to ask, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. When are you marrying her? The knife clattered onto the cutting board. He turned to face me fully, and I saw something complicated pass across his features. I asked Evelyn for time, told her family emergency, which isn't entirely a lie. Her father is furious, threatening to pull some business deal with my dad. But that's not your problem to worry about. Not my problem? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. Caden, you abandoned your bride at the altar because of me. Your entire life is imploding because of me. How is that not my problem? 'Cause I made the choice. His voice rose, startling both of us. He took a breath, visibly collecting himself. I'm the one who left. I'm the one who asked for a postponement. This isn't on you, Martin. This is me dealing with the consequences of my own decisions. What decisions? I pushed off the doorframe, moving closer. The decision to leave me 2 months ago, or the decision to suddenly care now that there's a baby involved. The words came out harsher than I intended, edged with weeks of hurt and confusion. But I needed to know. I needed to understand what was happening here, what he wanted, what this all meant. He flinched, his jaw tightening. That's not fair, isn't it? I challenged. You told me you needed someone stable, someone your family would accept. What's changed? Why are you here cooking dinner in my kitchen instead of planning your honeymoon with your perfect, stable fiancé? Because I can't stop thinking about you. The confession exploded out of him, loud and raw in the small kitchen. Because I haven't stopped thinking about you since the day I walked out. Because every morning I woke up next to Evelyn felt like a lie. I was telling myself, because when I saw you collapse at that wedding, I realized that nothing in my life matters if you're not okay. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there 3 feet apart, both breathing hard like we'd run a marathon. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him, so badly it physically hurt. But I'd been burned before, and the scar tissue was still fresh. I don't want your guilt, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. If you're here because you feel responsible, because you think you owe me something, then please just go. I've spent the last 2 months learning how to live without you. I can keep doing it. I can raise this baby alone. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame my face with a gentleness that made my breath catch. Look at me. When I didn't immediately comply, he repeated it, firmer. Martin, look at me. I did. Met his eyes and saw something there that looked almost like desperation. This isn't guilt, he said, each word deliberate and clear. This isn't obligation or responsibility or anything else you're thinking. I'm here because I want to be. Because the thought of you going through this alone makes me physically ill. Because that baby is mine, ours, and I'll be damned if I miss a single moment of this. But Evelyn, I don't love Evelyn. The interruption was gentle but absolute. I never loved Evelyn. I thought I could learn to, thought that would be enough. I was wrong. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. Then why did you leave me? His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, catching a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. Because I was a coward. Because I let my family's expectations matter more than my own happiness. Because I convinced myself that doing the right thing was more important than doing the thing that felt right. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. I've regretted it every single day since. I wanted to pull away, to protect myself from the possibility of more hurt. But I was tired. So tired of fighting, of being strong, of pretending I didn't still love him. So instead, I just stood there, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling his hands warm against my skin, and let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. I need time, I whispered. I need to know you're certain about this. Because I can't. My voice broke. I can't survive losing you again. You won't. His voice was fierce, absolute. I swear to you, Martin, you won't lose me again. Whatever it takes to prove that to you, I'll do it. The pasta burned while we stood there in my kitchen, holding each other like we were the only solid things in a shifting world. And for the first time in 2 months, I felt something that might have been peace. 3 weeks passed, and Caden kept his word. He showed up every single day without fail, sometimes with breakfast, sometimes with random pregnancy books he'd found, once with a ridiculous stuffed elephant that he claimed our baby absolutely needed. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never demanded declarations or decisions. He just showed up and stayed, steady and constant in a way I'd forgotten he could be. My 12-week ultrasound was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and I'd been planning to go alone. I'd gotten used to handling medical appointments by myself, had developed a system for staying calm and composed even when I was terrified, but when I mentioned it to Caden the night before, something shifted in his expression. "I'd like to come," he said carefully. "If that's okay with you, I'd like to see the baby." I should have expected it. Of course he wanted to come. But the thought of sharing that moment, of letting him into something so intimate and terrifying, made my chest tight with anxiety. What if something was wrong? What if he saw the baby and realized this was all too real, too complicated, and decided he'd made a mistake? Still, I heard myself saying yes. Heard myself giving him the address and time. Watched him enter it into his phone with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for important business meetings. It felt significant somehow, this choice to include him, like I was making a decision I couldn't take back. The waiting room was crowded when we arrived, filled with couples in various stages of pregnancy. I noticed how Caden's hand found the small of my back as we checked in, a possessive, protective gesture that made several people glance our way. An alpha and an omega here for an ultrasound. We probably looked like any other expectant couple, except I couldn't shake the feeling that everything about us was held together with tape and hope. When they called my name, I stood on shaky legs. Caden rose with me, his presence solid and grounding at my side. The ultrasound technician was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficient hands. She had me lie back on the examination table, had me lift my shirt to expose my still relatively flat stomach, and began prepping the equipment. "First baby?" she asked conversationally, squirting cold gel onto my skin. "Yes," Caden answered before I could, and his voice held so much wonder and terror that the technician smiled. "Exciting time," she said. "Let's see how your little one is doing." The first image on the screen was incomprehensible to me, just grainy gray shapes that could have been anything. But then she pointed explaining what we were seeing, and suddenly I could make out the distinctive curve of a head, the tiny flutter that was a heartbeat, the impossibly small limbs that would someday be arms and legs. "There's your baby," the technician said warmly. "Measuring right on track for 12 weeks. Strong heartbeat at 65 beats per minute. Everything looks perfect." Perfect. Our baby was perfect. I couldn't breathe around the emotion clogging my throat. Couldn't do anything except stare at that screen and try to comprehend that the tiny creature I was seeing was half me and half Caden, a whole new person we'd made together. I felt Caden's hand find mine, felt his fingers lace through mine and squeeze tight. When I finally tore my eyes from the screen to look at him, I found his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to wipe away. He was staring at the monitor like it held the secrets of the universe, his expression so full of awe and love and terror that it made my own tears start falling. "That's ours," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Martin, that's our baby." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The technician continued her examination, pointing out different features, explaining development milestones, but I barely heard her. I was too focused on Caden's face, on the way he looked at that screen like he'd been given the greatest gift in the world. After the appointment, we sat in his car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, neither of us ready to drive away. He kept staring at the ultrasound photos the technician had printed out, tracing the outline of our baby's head with one finger. "I almost missed this," he said suddenly, his voice hollow. "If you hadn't come to the wedding, if you hadn't fainted, I would have married Evelyn and never known. I would have messed all of this." The thought was too horrible to contemplate. "But you didn't. You're here now." "I'm here now," he repeated, like he was trying to convince himself it was real. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right moments, the right words, But there isn't going to be a perfect time, so I'm just going to say it. My heart started racing. Okay. I ended things with Evelyn. Officially, permanently. Told her I couldn't marry her, that it wouldn't be fair to either of us. He took a shaky breath. Her family is threatening legal action for breach of contract. My father hasn't spoken to me in 2 weeks, and I've essentially burned every bridge I had in my old life. I wanted you to know that before we go any further. I wanted you to understand that this isn't temporary or conditional. I've made my choice. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You ended your engagements. 2 weeks ago, actually. I just didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel pressured. Didn't want you to think I was using it as leverage or expecting something in return. He laughed without humor. Though I suppose telling you now isn't much better timing. Why? The question came out barely audible. Why would you give up everything? Because none of it matters without you. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. My father's approval, my family's money, the business connections, all of it. It's all worthless if I'm miserable, if I'm living a lie, if I'm not with the person I actually love. Love. The word hung between us, electric and terrifying. He'd said it so casually, like it wasn't earth-shattering, like it wasn't everything I'd wanted to hear for months. You love me? I needed to hear it again. Needed confirmation that I hadn't imagined it. I never stopped loving you, Martin. His hand found mine again, warm and steady. Leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. And I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to fix it. Seeing that baby today, seeing proof of what we made together, it just confirmed what I already knew. You're it for me. You and our child. That's my family now. I wanted to throw myself at him, wanted to kiss him and tell him I loved him too, and pretend the last 2 months of agony had never happened. But I was also terrified, scared of trusting too easily, scared of getting hurt again, scared of what happened when reality set in and he realized how hard this was going to be. I'm scared, I admitted instead. I'm so scared, Caden. Me too. He lifted my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles gently. But we'll figure it out together. That's what families do. Families. The word settled over me like a warm blanket, chasing away some of the cold fear that had taken up residence in my chest. We were going to be a family. Messy and complicated and unconventional, but a family nonetheless. 2 weeks after the ultrasound, Caden asked me to go somewhere with him. He wouldn't tell me where, just said to dress nicely and trust him. I almost said no, almost told him I wasn't ready for whatever this was. But something in his expression stopped me. He looked nervous, genuinely anxious in a way I hadn't seen since that day at the hospital. So I put on my nicest pants and a button-down shirt that was starting to get tight around my slowly expanding middle and let him drive us out of the city. We headed north into the suburbs, winding through tree-lined streets until we pulled up in front of a large house that I immediately recognized. My stomach dropped. This is your parents' house. Yes. He turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. They want to meet you. Properly this time. Not as the ex I kept hidden but as the father of their grandchild. I gripped the door handle, my palms suddenly sweaty. Caden, your parents hate Omegas. They hate me specifically. This is a terrible idea. They don't hate you. They don't know you. He reached over, gently prying my hand from the door handle and holding it between both of his. I know they're traditional. I know they have backwards ideas about dynamics and relationships. But they're also about to become grandparents. That changes things, does it? Or are they just going to make both of our lives miserable? I could hear the panic creeping into my voice. Maybe we should wait. Give them more time to adjust to the idea. Martin. He waited until I looked at him. I've spent my whole life trying to please them, trying to be the son they wanted me to be. I'm done with that, but I also know they're my parents, and they're going to be in our child's life whether we like it or not. So we might as well try to make peace now, on our terms, before things get more complicated. He wasn't wrong. As much as I wanted to avoid this confrontation, it was inevitable. Better to face it now than let it fester into something worse. The front door opened before we even reached it. Caden's mother stood in the doorway and I braced myself for coldness, for judgment, for all the subtle and not so subtle ways she could communicate her disapproval. But instead she just looked tired, older than I remembered from the few times I'd glimpsed her before. Caden, she said quietly. Martin, come in, please. The house was exactly as imposing as I remembered, all high ceilings and expensive furniture and family portraits that screamed old money. Caden's father was waiting in the living room, standing by the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between disapproval and resignation. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the couch. It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't friendly either. I sat, Caden immediately claiming the seat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. The gesture of solidarity didn't go unnoticed by his parents. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the tick of an antique clock on the mantel. Finally, Caden's mother took a seat in the chair across from us, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Your father and I have been discussing the situation," she began, and I noticed she was looking at Caden, not me. "We understand that you've ended your engagement to Evelyn Hartford. Her family has been quite vocal about their displeasure." "I'm aware," Caden said evenly. "You've also informed us that Mr. Chen is expecting your child." Now her eyes did flick to me, quick and assessing. "Is this correct?" "Yes." Caden's hand found mine, holding tight. "Martin is 14 weeks pregnant with my baby. And before you say anything else, I want to make something very clear. I love him. I'm going to be with him, raise this child with him, build a life with him. That's not negotiable." His father made a noise that might have been disapproval or simply acknowledgement. "You understand what you're throwing away? The Hartford deal, your position in the company, your standing in society? I understand that I'm choosing my family over yours expectations." Caden replied, his voice steady but firm. "I'm choosing happiness over approval. And if that means losing my position, then so be it. I'll find another job." "Don't be dramatic," his father said sharply. "You're still my son. I'm not disowning you over this." The admission seemed to cost him something, like he was acknowledging a weakness. His wife reached over and touched his arm gently, some silent communication passing between them. "We're not happy about this," she said finally, addressing both of us now. "We had different plans for Caden's future, different expectations, but we're also not going to abandon our son or our grandchild." She paused, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "We'd like to try to make this work, if you'll let us." I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until it all came out in a rush. This wasn't acceptance, not really, but it was better than outright rejection, better than the cold dismissal I'd been expecting. "There will be conditions," his father added, "because of course there would be. We'll expect discretion during the transition period while the Hartford situation settles. No public announcements until we've managed the fallout, and we'll want regular updates on the pregnancy, involvement in the child's life." "We can do that," Caden agreed before I could protest. "As long as you treat Martin with respect. As long as you acknowledge that he's my partner, not some temporary arrangement." Another long pause. Then his mother nodded slowly. "We can do that. It may take time for us to adjust, but we'll try." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the warm acceptance I'd secretly hoped for. But it was something, a foundation we could potentially build on. Looking at Caden's parents, at the way they were clearly struggling between their prejudices and their love for their son, I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. They were trapped by their own limitations, their own outdated beliefs, but they were trying to push past them. After we left, Caden pulled the car over 2 blocks away and just sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "That went better than I expected," I offered, trying to lighten the heavy atmosphere. He laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "My father didn't disown me and my mother didn't cry. I'm calling that a win." Then he turned to me, his expression serious. "Are you okay?" I know that was intense. "I'm okay," I said, and realized I meant it. "It's going to be complicated, but we knew that already. At least they're willing to try." "They are." He reached out, his hand coming to rest gently on my stomach, which had recently started to show a small but definite curve. "And this little one deserves to have grandparents who love them, even if it takes those grandparents some time to get there." I covered his hand with mine, feeling the warmth of his palm through my shirt. "We're really doing this, aren't we? Building a family together. We really are." He leaned over, pressing a soft kiss to my temple. "And it's going to be amazing." Messy and complicated and sometimes really hard but amazing. Sitting in that car, his hand on my stomach and hope looming cautiously in my chest, I let myself believe him. Let myself believe that maybe, despite everything that had gone wrong, we could actually make this work. That maybe love really could be enough, even when everything else was uncertain. The road ahead was going to be difficult. There would be more conversations with his parents, legal issues to sort out with Evelyn's family, 1,000 tiny decisions to make about how we wanted to raise this child. But for the first time since I'd seen that positive pregnancy test, I felt like I wasn't facing it alone. We were in this together, building something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. And that, I was beginning to realize, might just be enough.